Well, I was reading to you about 4 months ago, I think 4 months ago. I was reading to you the story of my grandmother's immigration from Ireland to the United States as a young girl. She wrote this memoir. She typed it up. I'm not sure when. At some point after her husband, my grandfather, passed away, and she wanted to just write her story. So I read through page 11 in the first installment. If you flip back through my blog entries, um, I've got a folder here on YouTube that says my blogs from the very beginning, and they're all in order. So you go back, you can see a picture of her on the thumbnail, and if you want to hear the first part. Anyway, we're going to take up with uh, where it says the hat. This is her chapter, the hat. Again, written by my grandmother on my dad's side. The hat. Mother used to go downtown shopping. Car fare was cheap, so it was an inexpensive source of pleasure. She often took me along for company. One day we were in a big department store and we stopped to look at hats in the children's department. Since Mother was inclined to dress us all in utilitarian colors, especially dark blue, I was overjoyed to be having a hat tried on me that was a lovely red color. This hat was so becoming that I was enchanted with it. Mother weakened and ordered it sent COD. Next day I watched the Litt brothers' truck pull up and stop across the street. The next day there was no truck, so I questioned Mother. She admitted having had second thoughts about the hat, and while I wasn't looking, she had rescinded the order. It was the little hat that never came, but it was something to remember. Brother's first haircut. The way I've spoken of our little brother, Vincent, makes him sound rather like a veritable monster. Actually, he was at that time a very handsome child. Oops, turned the page the wrong way. Pardon me. Actually, he was at that time a very handsome child with a head of golden brown curly hair. He was at times rough and heedless, yes, but perhaps it's because he longed to be more grown up, like his brothers. Anyway, unlike myself, he wasn't taken visiting, although he was left in our dad's competent care. But one Sunday, my dog has decided that she wants to be part of this story. Excuse me, technical difficulties. Although he was left in our dad's competent care. But one Sunday, Mother dressed him in a little white suit. It was most unusual for her to use such a light color on a boy. She left him with his father while she took Madeline and me to visit a cousin and her family in the then swanky Hayden Heights, New Jersey. We enjoyed the little visit, although I was a bit on the too lively side for our hostess. She was pregnant. So that as it may, the surprise that awaited our return home was told us by our amusing neighbor, Mrs. Carney. It seems that Vincent went out to the backyard to look at a pet rabbit belonging to one of his brothers. It had rained hard the day before, so the yard was muddy. Vincent got muddy from head to foot. Where was his dad? Sitting on the front porch talking to Mrs. Carney. Suddenly a little voice at the door whispered, "Papa!" They both looked over to see Vincent, all covered with mud. Mrs. Carney thought it was hilarious. I don't know what Dad thought. He had the cleanup job to do. But the strongest memory I have of Vincent was the one of his first real haircut. He kept nagging Mother, finally succeeding in lowering her defenses against cutting his hair. One day I'd gone up to 52nd Street and passed the barber shop right near the corner of 52nd and Spur Street. By chance I glanced into the store as I went by and stopped. There was Vincent, sitting happily on the barber chair with Mother standing by it, looking sadly at the beautiful curly locks falling on the floor. I couldn't help chuckling. Then I walked on. What was there to do in a moment like that? Dancing lessons. For 3 or 4 years, our mother managed to have enough to send me to a dancing school on 52nd Street, but it was hush hush. It was hush hush from Dad. He'd never have approved of our wasting money like that. So I managed to keep it a secret, always with just one squeaky moment. This day I was walking on 52nd Street. We lived at 55th and Spruce Streets. I was heading for a lesson when I came face to face with Dad. I evaded his question about why I was there, but couldn't refuse to be walked back home by him. No sooner than he became busy at home, I literally flew off to my lesson, holding tight to my little bag containing my dancing slippers. I've often wondered since then what children learn from such a lack of communication. The scissors experiment. If Vincent seemed naughty, I too was surely no angel. One time Mother and Madeline received tickets for an opera. Mother must have taken it for granted that I would behave well while they were out. Dad always worked night work, so naturally he wasn't available. That was the very time I undertook to conduct a barbering experiment. First I cut bangs in my hair, then with the scissors in my hand, just waiting to do more mischief, I cut off half of my eyelashes. Just before Mother and Madeline were due home, I jumped into bed and pretended to be asleep. Mother took one look at me and let out a cry of horror. Next day my parents punished me, and it was a well-deserved one, too. It's easy to be philosophical when it no longer hurts, right? When I was in 5th grade, a big decision was made, one which affected everyone in our family, even down to Vincent, now 6, and our new baby, Gerald, less than 1 year old. Madeline was one of a group of several young artists, boys and girls, considered talented enough to receive European training. There was at that time a group of wealthy and influential people in Philadelphia who had banded together to sponsor this endeavor. They all agreed to put into a fund a certain sum of money each year to be used for this purpose. The fund was to be administered by Dr. Herlong, a music-loving dentist in Philadelphia. He decided to send this one to Berlin to study with Karl Fleisch, that one to Vienna to study with Slevik, another to Rome, etc., etc. Madeline was to study with Leopold Auer in St. Petersburg, Russia. Upon thinking this over, Dr. Herlong decided that St. Petersburg's weather was too freezing cold for Madeline, so he decided it was better to send her to Budapest in Austria-Hungary at that time. She was to study there with the renowned Eugene Hubay. Hubay was known all over the music world for his compositions then. He was a fine man, handsome, bearded, married to a countess. They had 2 young sons who, to Madeline's amazement, wore Eton suits and 3/4 length socks in midwinter. It had been decided that Mother should go with Madeline to get her settled there. Mother took our tiny brother Gerald with them. This child was rather delicate. Perhaps everyone thought that the sea air would be good for him. Instead, his health slowly deteriorated. He became worse. Although he amazed the doctors with his fight for life, he died. Our tiny brother is buried in Hungary. At the time of Mother's departure, we had a maid. In those days, one cost very little. But she soon quit, and John, 12, and I, at 10 and a half, were in a real bind trying to cope with the problem of cooking for all the rest of the family left here. John and I would get through most of the week thanks to a variety of Campbell's soups. Each weekend Dad would buy a pot roast, and a kind neighbor would cook it in one of our saucepans. Our brother Eugene could cook mashed potatoes, so we were able to enjoy the taste of well-cooked food every Sunday. In the meantime, Madeline took quite a while getting settled in Hungary. She and Mother had quite a few experiences there. You see, Madeline, being young and bright, learned both German and Hungarian quickly. So when they were shopping, Mother would ask the cost of something in fractured German. Madeline could hear the shopkeeper say to the clerk, "Ask for 25 kronen, but go down to 5." Madeline could understand, although she never let them know it. When young men would say to another about her, "Oh, how sweet," or "Isn't she pretty," in Hungarian. Another thing that amused us when we were told about it later was that when the seats were all occupied in the Budapest trolleys, no one else was allowed to board them. Instead, the conductor would say politely, "No room, please, I beg you," in Hungarian, naturally. Can you imagine that in New York in the rush hour? The returns. I got these reading glasses from Dollar Tree. I'm going to put them on, sorry. The returns. When Mother came home finally, she realized how badly we had needed her, and I'm sure she felt contrite. Madeline was brought back later when things began to look ominous. War seemed imminent, although it wasn't triggered until a little later. She returned. She re, she resumed her studies here after a short time away to regain her health completely. In those days, another school. In those days, there were just 7 grades at the Hamilton school, so each year the students finishing 7th grade would be sent to another school for the 8th. Our John, a year ahead of me, was sent to one school, and I, next year, was sent to another one, the William Cullen Bryant, at 60th and Cedar Avenue, 6 squares at least from our house. Our 8th grade teacher was a tall, stately blonde who gave us excellent training in different subjects. Our principal there was very nice. He seemed to me to be very, very old, probably because his hair was snow white. He was truly interested in the children's welfare, never failing to show up in the schoolyard each morning to see that we all got in school safely. One day I told him that my ambition was to finish the year first in the class because my mother had been first in her 8th grade class. This man's wife was also a teacher in the Philadelphia school system. I heard a little later that she was the originator of the junior high school system. It seemed that after 6 years in one school, the children were sent elsewhere for 3 years. Then they were moved to still another school for the last 3 years of senior high. Whether this was or is wise is a moot question. It surely necessitated constant adjustments that not all children could make. Getting back to my own 8th grade, although I did an excellent job mentally, alas, I was all too often late for school. I lacked the discipline to time my departure for school, and Mother didn't insist that I give myself enough time. Because it annoyed Miss Hart so much, I tried to improve my timing with some success. She was so cross with my tardiness that I had little hope of graduating first, since one girl was near perfection in all her study habits, etc. I must have done a great job at our final examinations in May, because when the principal came into our room in June with the promotion list, I was thrilled when he called my name out. The first. I'm sure Mother must have said, "That's nice," or something like that, but I can't remember a single bit of celebration. Not that it matters in retrospect. There's a lot of melancholy in this. A lot of little comments that's like, really, there's a sense of sadness. And this is, when they talk about war, they're talking about World War One. This is way back there. Um, all through this year, I had a dearly devoted girlfriend named Eva Seidel. We used to walk most of the way home from school together. She lived a few blocks nearer the school than I did. Eva listened attentively one day when I told her I was descended from an Irish king. She looked at me admiringly and said, "I believe it." Having said it only as tongue-in-cheek humor, I was both amused and impressed with her loyalty. I've seldom found any friendship as true as that one since then. That fall, we had to attend an annex, since the main high school was overcrowded. I never saw Eva again, but I was always grateful for that ego boost. The dog is scratching here, and that's what's causing the whole couch to move. Pardon me. I never saw Eva again, but I was always grateful for her ego boost. The annex was so far from home that I had to ride there on the trolley. But the year was a good one. I even got an A in gym, a subject we'd never had before. Although the gym suit was ugly to my way of thinking, and the shoes even worse, I was determined to do well and succeeded. In the meantime, I was getting elocution lessons a couple of times a week after school. I'd ride down to 17th and Chestnut and walk up the street to where the studio was located on the second floor. Mrs. Kilgare was an excellent teacher of dramatics. She had a large studio with a big room which had a small platform at one end. We used it as a stage. Each pupil took a turn on it, reciting her particular recitation. Soon I recovered from my preliminary nervousness and enjoyed it all so much that to this day I can remember many of those recitations, and that is a long time to recall them. War is declared. On Easter Day, 1917, it snowed, which in itself seemed eerie. Even stranger was the uneasiness and fear which accompanied the selling of extra editions of the daily papers. Newsboys were shouting, "War is declared." Just a few months before then, Woodrow Wilson had campaigned and won the presidential election with the slogan, "He kept us out of the war." Now he was declaring a war with the slogan, "We will make the world safe for democracy." Quickly they gathered all the young men they could, even my brother Eugene, who needed dental work and glasses. He was nearly blind in one eye. They gave all these boys a very sketchy training and hurried them over to France. I'm not speaking bitterly, just stating what happened. We heard from Eugene occasionally. He had not received either glasses as promised or dental work. He was not the most prolific writer, and everything was censored anyway. We all loved Eugene because he was the wittiest and best natured of the boys in the family. So we were overjoyed when the armistice was declared. The blow. Then the blow fell. We received a letter from a priest in France saying to our parents, "You will be glad to know that before your son died, he received the last rites of the church and is buried in a Catholic cemetery." What a shock! Mother, who had always looked so young and beautiful to me, aged 10 years. Eugene's best friend, Eddie Naff, also drafted hurriedly, was blown to bits in the war. We recovered slowly from the shock. Life moved on, more or less into a routine. Our move to a newly built house on 61st Street was a good step forward at that time. Wonder of wonders, this house had electricity. We had only had gas before. How filled with amazement we were at being able to touch a switch button and there was light in the room. Overjoyed, we could hardly stop turning the lights on and off to see electricity in action. Our house was just next door to the model house, so we often heard the agent on duty boasting the house's good points to potential buyers. We were almost convulsed with secret laughter when we overheard him saying, "These houses, with their portentous porches." We knew he meant pretentious, but never told him, of course. It would have hurt his feelings. Now that we had this nice new house, most of the family was elsewhere. Jay was married, had been for several years. They had 2 boys and a girl. Madeline also was married, and they lived in New York. John and I were both working. Only Vincent was still in school. It was an ending to our childhood, but all too soon a whole new life would open for us. Who could guess then what it would be? But that is another story, albeit a true one. And then there's another memoir she wrote about her husband, my grandfather's baseball career. He was a professional baseball player, and I can read that to you at a later time. The when she writes about her brother dying right after the war was over, that he died of the flu, the 1918 flu that you've heard people talk about. That was the big time pandemic. This is a little pandemic. This is like maybe 1/10, if even that, of what happened in 1918. It was a flu that just decimated the world's population, and so that's why he was buried over there. Okay, so that's the end of that. I've been meaning to go back and read the second part of it, and now it's 4 months later, and I've looked quite a bit different than I did back then. The pandemic has put on a few pounds, but I'm going to start working on a diet, and I will be back with more incredibly amazing comic book and horror, monster, ghoul, vampire videos before you know it. Take care.